Hi, everyone. My name is Harvey Young. I have the great pleasure of being the Dean of the College of Fine Arts here at Boston University, and to be in conversation with my friend and BU alum, Mark Mobius. Mark, hi, how are you doing today?
Hi, Harvey. Good to be with you today.
To give everyone a sense of today's conversation, I'm going to offer a fairly brief introduction of Mark Mobius. Mark and I will talk for about 20 minutes. I encourage those of you who are watching this right now, if you have any questions that you want me to ask Mark, I encourage you to, at the bottom of your screen where the Q&A option is, to write your questions, and then we'll go through as many questions as we can. And you can feel free to enter questions at any point in time, but I will hold on actually asking any questions for about 20 minutes. Mark Mobius is a legendary emerging market investor. He is the Indiana Jones, as he's been called many times, featured in sort of documentaries, sort of comic books and more, and the Indiana Jones of emerging markets. Mark Mobius is a proud BU alum, having graduated from both the Department of Theater at the time, that was the Department of Theater, the School of Theater, as well as from communication. He holds a PhD from MIT. His sort of vast and varied experiences, of which we'll talk about a bit, include everything from playing pianos in a nightclub to marketing Snoopy across Asia, to serving as a market researcher, to creating his own securities analysis firm. And of course, in 1987, he was brought and sort of hired and sort of targeted by Sir John Templeton to oversee emerging markets for Templeton. And as the head, Mark Mobius sort of oversaw what initially began as about $100 million of funds being invested. And after about 30 years, sort of left having managed a portfolio that exceeded $40 billion. It's extraordinary. What some people would say is even more remarkable is that in the last 3 years, starting in 2018, Mark Mobius founded Mobius Capital Partners, a new emerging markets initiative, a fund that really looks at sort of proper governance practices, looking into emerging markets. And if you've looked and read about Mark Mobius for the last decades, but certainly even the last week, he is everywhere. He is the voice that many people go to to ask about uncertainties in the market. Where should we sort of look for opportunities? Where is there value out in the world? And even just this week, just the last 3 days, you will have seen Mark Mobius on CNBC, on Squawk Box. You would have seen him featured in Bloomsburg as well. We're talking about everything from the Ant Group and regulation in China to sort of U.S. equities and what the Biden administration might mean. So it's a real gift and it's an honor to have Mark Mobius here in conversation today. Mark, I want to just begin, sort of pointing out something that many of us here in the greater Boston area, in the U.S., the nation at large, are wondering about. So what advice do you have for people who are looking at sort of the double influence, let's put it that way, of the COVID pandemic still existing, and impacting sort of operations around the world, as well as this sort of transition of presidents upcoming from Trump to Biden. So what advice do you have for people in terms of, how should we make sense of this moment related to this felt uncertainty that people have?
Right. Well, first of all, thanks for that wonderful introduction. It was a great summary of where I've been and hopefully where I'm going. As regards to the current situation, I think we can say that the outlook is very good for next year. And the reason why I say that is a number of indicators we can see. First of all, if you look at the stock market, the market has done very well while economies around the world have gone downhill and actually have gone in negative territory. But what the market is telling us is that next year we will have a much better economic situation around the world, not only in the US, but all over the world. And the COVID situation is, of course, a very important part of the story, because while this year COVID has put a damper on economies around the world, next year we will not see that, because we are now coming into a time when COVID vaccination will be possible. And more importantly, in my view, COVID treatment will be much better. In other words, we're coming up with new drugs, new treatment criteria, and so forth. you must remember, generally speaking, the medical profession has been at a loss as to what is COVID, how to treat it, how to vaccinate against it, and so forth and so on. And there have been lots of debates within the medical community about this. This is now beginning to come to an end, and we're finding information that we didn't know before. And I believe this will be a very good sign for next year. Now, as regards to the election, regardless of whether you favor Trump or Biden, the fact is that we now have a situation where Biden will probably become president. I think it's pretty certain that the Trump challenge would not be successful. And if that's the case, we will have a president who will want to bring people together, will want to have a more peaceful relationship with China and other countries around the world, which will probably be a good sign for the economy and for the world in general. And also, I believe that the Biden administration will find it difficult to impose additional taxes because you have a Republican Congress, a Republican Senate, and a House that's dominated by the Democrats. So it's pretty much of a hung situation. So difficult for them to implement the tax increases. Originally, when the election was taking place, I thought, well, a Biden win will be bad for the economy because raising taxes will, of course, dampen out the stock market and not be good for the economy. But now it's less certain that this will take place. So generally speaking, I'm very optimistic about what we're seeing in the time ahead.
And I would say that, you know, you have a reputation as a world traveler, and sort of travel limitations and travel disruptions are just kind of a reality that we're all facing in this age of this moment of COVID. And to put this in perspective, I think that, you know, when I first started having conversations and we first connected, I think that you were always in a different city. And that's kind of legendary, right? You know, that you know, it's like where in the world will Mark Mobius be on this day, right? And it was always impressive to me how, you know, within a given week, the sheer number of countries, the number of places where you were in, you know, in terms of sort of scouting out emerging markets, you know, sort of giving talks, it's extraordinarily impressive. And what's impressive to me equally as well is that, you know, in the midst of COVID, I think the last 3 times we've spoken over the course of the last few months, you've been in South Africa, in Germany, and now the Middle East. So it's like your pace is slowed down because of COVID, but you're still moving at an enviable, impressive rate, you know, compared to, like, you know, most of us who are, you know, sort of driving from home to the grocery store. You know?
Well, yeah, it is quite amazing how you're able to move around the world, even with all these restrictions. 2 weeks ago, I was in Athens, Greece, and within Greece, I was traveling to the different islands. Before that, I was in Italy. Before that, I was in Spain and Portugal. Then I was in Germany, of course, as you mentioned. And of course, earlier this year, I was all over Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and so forth. So it's still possible to travel, but of course, more difficult. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about your time at BU, and, you know, what inspired you to sort of choose BU and specifically choose the arts, choose theater?
Well, I started really in high school. I went to high school in Long Island, New York, and we participated in the chorus. You know, we were singers, and also we participated in theater and the drama that the high school put on. It's like, I remember the Pirates of Penzance, if you remember the operetta by Gilbert and Sullivan. And that sort of struck me as something I wanted to do longer term. So I said, let's see if I can get into BU and study theater, study acting, study directing, and just get involved in this art area. And that's how it started, really. And of course, I didn't know what I was doing. You know, being at that age, you just pick what you think you like. And of course, one thing led to another, and you can see where I am now today in a completely different area.
And what was the conversation like, you know, with your parents when you said, you know, I want to pursue the arts, you know, at that
Well,
session?
my mother was very, very eager to see me become a movie star or a theater star. So she was really the driving force, let's put it that way. My father unfortunately died when I was in high school, but coming from Germany, he was more staid and more practical, let's put it that way. So I don't know whether he would have liked the idea, but I think he would have gone along with it anyway.
And what are the highlights, that you recall from your time at BU in terms of making theater and being in the arts on campus here in Boston?
It was really a very exciting time because remember, this was the time when method acting was in the vogue. Marlon Brando was making On the Waterfront and other films. And of course, he was a disciple of the method, Stanislavski method acting. And in my class was Susan Harrison. I don't know whether you remember her. She starred in Sweet Smell of Success, which was another, great film. And again, method acting was the vogue in that film as well. So that was a very exciting thing for me because one of the things about method acting is that you have to feel empathy for the character that you're playing, and you have to inculcate the characteristics of the character in your own being. And that was incredible training, and it's really helped me throughout my life because I now am able to empathize much better with other people and connect with what they're thinking. So it was quite exciting.
Yeah, what I find amazing and important to underscore here is that so when you were a student here at Boston University in the late 1950s, what you have is you have the emergence of American theater, right? So it was not that many years earlier that you had sort of Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, sort of The Crucible, sort of emerging, right?
Yes.
So those were kind of almost like hot off the press, right off of Broadway, and then those shows would have workshops, that an initial pre-Broadway runs that would sort of land in Boston and before moving to Broadway, and I think that's really significant. Where you think about Streetcar Named Desire, Tennessee Williams' play, right, which was 47, 48, but then the film with Marlon Brando comes out in 51, right? So it's like there's this moment in which it's, we're shifting from stories of kings and queens to like, the psychology of the everyday person. And I think that level of deep introspection and also the change in acting, really, offers a way of thinking about the psychology of humankind. And you've talked about that in a recent BU CFA magazine actual article in which you talk about the importance of knowing the psychology of human nature. So can you say a bit more about, how the arts gave you insight into that?
That's right. And that really led me to study social psychology. So one of the courses I took at Boston University was social psychology. And that, one thing led to another. And of course, that got me into economics and other areas. So very, very important development.
What role do the arts play in your life right now?
Now, I'm acting every day. when you see me on CNBC, I'm acting. Well, the world is a stage, let's put it that way. And you've got to be able to express yourself well. And that's one of the wonderful things that I learned at the school, how to express yourself and empathize with the people you're talking with. So that has really helped me in a very wonderful way.
Makes sense. And let's talk a bit more about the music, part of your life, in terms of, piano and performing. What are your personal highlights in terms of, the influence of music professionally or sort of as an amateur, in your practice?
Well, when I was a child, my mother and father insisted that we both, my two brothers and myself, study music, and I took up piano and learned to play fairly well, so that when I was at the BU, I was able to make some money playing in bars in the BU area, and that helped me a lot, and it was a lot of fun. It was something that I really enjoyed, and unfortunately, I've missed that because the way I travel, I can't carry a piano around with me. So hopefully, if I can settle down somewhere, I'll be able to take it up again. But it's a lot of fun.
Clearly, you just need to have a keyboard sort of shipped in advance everywhere you go.
That's the way to do it. Exactly. That's the way to do it. Yeah. And of course, what it did also is help me appreciate music generally. So, I mean, I can enjoy the latest pop music and also classical music because I love jazz. And I remember one of the highlights when I was at BU was to attend a concert by Errol Garner. I don't know whether you were familiar with Errol Garner, the great jazz pianist. That was really a highlight for me. I really admired his playing.
So one of the things that I think is inherently important and necessary for a person who is sort of as dynamic a traveler as you are, a person who's really engaging on the ground, like literally being like on site in places, on sort of meeting with individuals across these different emerging markets, is an appreciation for culture, right? And I mean, you have vast and varied interests. So what is your approach? What has been your sort of way of navigating the world in terms of really, sort of not thinking about these relationships as transactional in terms of business at a business level solely, but in terms of being aware of the cultures where you are, the people with whom you're engaging, the traditions that are important to those regions?
Well, one of the things I found that in traveling around the world and investing around the world, because don't forget we've invested in over 70 countries, is that you really have to observe and listen very, very carefully. That's, by the way, another thing I learned at BU and learned in the theater is that in order to represent a character, you have to understand the character and listen to what the script is telling you. And this is also true when you're visiting a country. You've got to be very observant and sensitive to how people are living, what they believe, what their customs are, and so forth and so on. And that's extremely important to be successful in investing. And as we've gone through this process of investing in individual companies around the world, we now realize that the most important thing beyond the balance sheet and the profitability of a company is the people running the company. What is their nature? What are their characteristics? And how are they operating within the framework of the company in terms of how they're treating their staff? How about the corporate governance? All of these are really human factors more than anything else.
And you've spoken a lot about the significance of ESG. Could you say a bit more about that?
Yes, in fact, the reason why we started Mobius Capital Partners is to have a fund which focused on corporate governance. In other words, improving the way companies operate as vis-a-vis the community and vis-a-vis their staff and their shareholders. So what we do is we go into a company, and of course, once we're satisfied that the financials look good, we then ask them, are you willing to work with us to improve your corporate governance? If they are, then we start making suggestions. For example, having a woman on the board of directors of the company. For example, having dividends paid out on a regular basis, and so forth and so on. So all of these factors are very, very important. And of course, in the past, we did look at the environmental and social factors, but now it's becoming even more important.
And what's led to that centering of the environmental and the social, sort of in the more recent years? Like, so what's marked that shift?
Well, it's really a societal shift. More and more of our investors have asked us to focus on these factors, ESG factors. And then closer examination indicated that companies that have high scores on ESG, environmental, social, and governance standards, perform better. In other words, the benefits in terms of price appreciation are much better. So that's the reason why we've emphasized it.
I think that certainly gives me hope, right? The idea that you sort of corporations and companies that are focusing upon environment, sort of proper governance, sort of being mindful of all these things can actually be not only better run, but also more profitable in the end run, right? Like
Exactly.
That's what you hope for. I want to actually take a moment and sort of pull some questions that have come out here. Let's see, I'm going to just read here. So here's a question from Jana, Investment 101, I'm going to read it to you. Do you have a general philosophy for the average investor about when to double down on cash savings versus the market? Do you generally advise young to middle-aged people to leave their portfolios alone or to take a look, say annually or quarterly?
Well, first of all, in terms of timing, we always like to say the best time to invest is when you have money. And by that, we mean you have to be fully invested as much as possible, because sitting on cash, particularly now with interest rates the way they are, you really should be invested in stocks. That, of course, that means stocks that are sound, well managed, profitable, etc. And so what I advise people to do is to, on a monthly basis, take a look at their portfolio, see how it looks. Don't do so much switching. In other words, select the good stocks and keep staying with them for quite some time, unless something dramatic happens to the management or something like that. And most of all, be diversified globally. In other words, if you put your eggs in one basket, you're going to have to watch that basket very, very closely. And most people don't have that time. So they've got to be diversified. So my advice is to be invested in good funds and good companies, sound companies, and diversify on a global basis. There are lots of good stocks in America, but there are also incredible bargains all over the world, particularly in emerging markets.
And just as a follow-up, so for a person starting out, how would they go about finding the right, the right funds to engage in, or the right, sort of ways to invest? I mean, so what would you recommend for like the average person in terms of like how to stay abreast of the news? Is it like sort of tuning in to CNBC, for example? Is it reading certain periodicals? What do you recommend?
Well, there are a tremendous number of advisory services on ranking funds, for example. Morningstar is one example of a company, and I think you can probably get some of the Morningstar without recommendations without having to buy the service. But if you have an account with someone like Charles Schwab or any of these other brokers, they have a tremendous amount of research available to their customers free of charge. So there are many, many ways to access good information. But what you should try to do is focus on companies that have a good reputation in terms of management, and companies that follow certain criteria, meet certain criteria, such as paying dividends on a regular basis, a strong balance sheet, not too high debt, and in an industry that's growing. So you have to look at that factor as well. So if you're doing an individual stock selection, you have to look at many of these factors. But many people don't have time, which is why it's good to buy a fund or buy a few funds that have you exposed to the global situation, global diversification.
That's helpful. But the next question is from Laura, and this is about Brazil. What is your outlook on Brazil, considering COVID, the Bolsonaro-US relationship, agriculture?
Brazil has not been doing too well lately, but there are some incredible companies in Brazil. We're invested in Brazil. We have, let's say, 3 stocks now in Brazil, and they're doing pretty well. Overall, the stock market is not doing as well as the US market, but we believe that will change going forward because Brazil, as you know, has incredible resources, incredible young population, and they can do quite well going forward. But right now they're going through a difficult patch. As regards to COVID, I think, as I mentioned, with the discovery of vaccines, with new treatments, the COVID situation will not weigh heavily on the Brazil market. I think they will pull through all right. So next year, you're going to see a good recovery in Brazil.
The next question is from George, and this is the question. Bill Ackman is placing a bet on the decline of credit markets as COVID cases continue to climb. Do you also foresee a decline in credit with Pfizer's announcement of vaccine tests results this week?
If you look at the credit markets, you see interest rates at very, very, very low levels. And given the statements that the Fed has made, of course, the Fed leads the world in terms of interest rate environment and interest rate policies. I don't think you're going to have a rise in interest rates next year, and therefore the credit markets are going to be very, very active. And of course, there will be bankruptcies, there will be problems along the way because of COVID, but at the end of the day, there'll be tremendous opportunities going forward in stocks, and not necessarily in fixed income, but in stocks.
Next up is Cecilia, whose question is, given your intersection of the arts and business, how can today's artists better position themselves to be entrepreneurs?
Well, that's a very good question, because now the opportunities for entrepreneurs is probably greater than ever before. The amount of money that's going into startups and to venture capital provides great opportunities for people who want to start something in theater, in the artistic world, in any direction. So I would say, if you have an idea, a product, a service, there will be opportunities for you to get venture capital money and to get started. And with the internet, of course, your word can be spread out very, very quickly. So if you're in the arts, I believe that the opportunities are greater than ever before, because the trend towards artistic endeavors is going to grow, not diminish. We're going to become much more of a service-oriented economy, and that means greater attention to the arts.
And just as a follow-up along those lines, it's an odd moment we're in right now. Sort of there are theaters that are closed, right? Broadway's been closed for a while now, and the prospects are that it will not reopen for a while longer with COVID and restrictions related to proper health advisories and public safety. So, what advice do you have to that parent out there who's telling their young person, that a career in the arts, or to study the arts will not prepare them for success in the world of business or governance or whatever else? And so how would you sort of respond to that parent?
By the way, I think the government policies globally around COVID did a lot of harm to the arts because of the restriction on attending theaters and generally getting people together. And I think that was a big, big mistake. And I believe that that era in policy will come to an end by the end of this year. So hopefully we can revive the theater, revive the arts, the public arts very, very quickly, because it's essential. As you pointed out, a play like Crucible would not have been appreciated if it wasn't in the theater first and then put on film. I think a lot of what's missing in the film industry now is this incredible learning that you have in the theater. So I think we're going to have to come back to live theater, live concerts, and generally people getting together more and more to enjoy the arts. It will come back, and we have to encourage that as we go forward.
And of course, even if a person chooses a career path other than the arts, as you did, right? You've already pointed out that your ability to explore sort of human psychology, right? The self-presentation, I would imagine the appreciation of culture as well that we talked about, in addition to the ability to work within a collaborative team environment. And one of the things that I find really impressive relates to your team and actually your co-partners with Mobius Capital Partners, sort of just really good people. Can you talk a bit about what you look for in sort of bringing together people for an enterprise?
That's a very, very good point, because we cannot do things alone. You need a team. If you talk to any successful person, you'll find that they depended on a team. They depended on other people to help them achieve what they had to achieve. And of course, that's one of the things I learned at Boston University. When you're in a theater, if you're acting in a theater, you have to learn how to work with the other actors, with the other team members, and not only the actors, but all the people behind the scenes and all the rest of it. So it's very essential that we learn teamwork. And of course, with teamwork, you have to have empathy. You have to have a feeling for the other person and understanding. And you're absolutely right. I wouldn't be where I am today if it hadn't been for the team supporting me. So, I would say advice to parents of young people is a team participation is extremely important. And it doesn't have to be a football team, doesn't have to be a baseball team, although all that is great. It can be a theater team, it can be a chorus, it can be any one of those things. And what I would also say is that it's very, very important for us to emphasize creativity, because we're moving into a robotized world where robots will do a lot of what we're doing now. And the way these robots work will be very, very straightforward, but we're going to have to instruct the robots on what to do. And that's where the creative aspects come into play. So I believe more than any other time in the history of mankind, creativity is going to become much more important. And that's why, your school is so important as part of the component of the entire picture at Boston University.
That was well stated. I will probably be quoting you a lot in the coming days, weeks, months, years, and beyond. So next question comes from K, as in the letter K, and that is, what's your personal definition of emerging markets, and which are the top 3 markets you're looking at?
It's a very good question, a very interesting question, because when we started in 1987, emerging markets were defined as the low and middle income countries, as defined by the World Bank. And that included all of Latin America, all of Africa, all of Asia. And of course, in those days, there was no Eastern Europe. It was part of the Soviet Union. So that was the definition. And in those days, when we started, there were only 7 countries where we could invest, because there weren't stock markets in most of the other countries that were available to us. Now there's 70 countries that are fall into that category. And the definition, I believe, is going to be changing going forward, because the whole purpose of being in emerging markets was to be exposed to high growth countries. Because emerging markets, as we define them now, all these low and middle income countries are growing about twice the growth rate of the developed countries, US, Europe, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. So I believe that as we go forward, we're probably going to have to redefine emerging markets and pinpoint only those countries that have the potential for this very high growth. But anyway, right now, the definition of emerging markets is still the low and middle income countries. And that includes all of Latin America, all of Africa. And now, of course, we have China, we have India, we have Russia, we have all of Eastern Europe. So the scope is incredible, lots of opportunities.
And which markets, if you can say, if you can't, no worries, are you really looking at in terms of your top 3?
Well, if you look at our portfolio, we have 2 funds, the Mobius Investment Trust in the UK and the CCAP in Luxembourg. The biggest country is India. We're finding lots of opportunities in India. And of course, the Indian market has performed very well. The second one is Korea, South Korea. Third is China, and then Taiwan. those are the top ones.
I was watching a couple of interviews with you, I guess from not too long ago, in which you were also talking about Turkey and then sort of how over the years, like Turkey has been a place where you've made some worthwhile investments over time.
Yes, in fact, we have 2 investments in Turkey now. A company that makes jeans, the blue jeans, that's doing very well, and a software company that's doing quite well.
I'm going to return to our question bank here. So this is from Lauren. What is your feeling about the performing arts' ability to recover from COVID? I'm involved, this Lauren, in Broadway and commercial theater specifically. We are hurting, and it's not simple to bring us. It is not simple to bring us back.
I know. I mean, it's a tragedy. I believe really it's a tragedy, and I think the funds that the governments are using to help firms and help the economy, a lot of this money should go into the arts and helping to survive, helping the theater world to survive and regain their previous stature. And the end of lockdown is the most important thing that can happen. We've got to get this finished, and so that the theaters can open again. But I would advise her to stay with it. Don't give up, because this is going to end, and there will be great opportunities again in Broadway, in the theater, and because people want to get to the theater again. They want to get back. The strange thing is that the rules and regulations regarding contacts and so forth are really insane. It's funny. A few months ago, I was in Frankfurt Airport, and they have signs around which says, keep 2 meters away from the person next in front of you or behind you. But then you get on the plane and you're sitting next to people who are 1 foot away from you. Now, I mean, isn't this crazy? So that's why I say the whole system of lockdowns, I think, is faulty and has to be changed, and hopefully will be changed soon. But I would advise people in the theater to keep faith, because it will end.
We're down to our last few minutes here, but there's still more questions I want to get to. So the next one comes from J, as in the letter J, just first initial. Do you consider income equality and giving all employees stock options a part of good corporate governance?
That's a very, very good question. In fact, we are dealing with this almost on a daily basis. It's interesting. One of the companies that we invest in, this was in, I think it was Turkey. We said, look, we noticed you don't have stock options for your employees. And they said, no, we don't, because they prefer to have bonuses rather than stock options. So it depends on where you're sitting. And of course, tax is also a factor. Some countries will tax these stock options, so we have to be careful on that. But I agree, generally speaking, we want to have the staff and the employees to have a role, a share of the company, so that they feel attached to the company and they share in the profits. As regards to income equality, I think at the end of the day, we're going to be moving in the future towards guaranteed incomes for people, so that no one goes without some form of support. I believe this will be the trend in the future. And also, by the way, I believe that at the end of the day, we won't have to be employed, because there will be so much available for everyone. The machines will be producing everything we want. The indicator will be low employment rather than high employment. People will strive for that sort of thing. And again, the theater, the arts will flourish in this time of plenty.
I like your crystal ball. I love it. I like that future you have. Next,
by the way, I'm coming out with a new book.
Yes.
I hope that everyone would go into Amazon and look at my new book. It's about inflation. It's called The Inflation Myth, and the deflation that's taking place around the world. I think it explains what I believe to be happening in the world, which is going to be very good going forward.
All right, and that book comes out. Is it late? Is it out now, or does it come out like in a few weeks?
Actually, it's you can get it on Kindle. The hard copy will be out by the end of this month.
Perfect.
But if you look at Amazon, you'll see it.
Excellent. And that's the Inflation Myth by Mark Mobius coming out.
Right.
Available now, right? As an
Yes.
e-version, and then you can purchase it via, it's actually available to a number of retailers for advance orders for the hard copy. I have two questions left, for the time allotted here. And the first one comes from Jane of the two. You've obviously achieved a great deal of success over the course of your career. Are there any missteps along the way that stand out in your mind as having been a valuable learning opportunity?
Oh yeah. How much time do you have?
Just take a
I think, I think the biggest missteps related to people. Very often I didn't reach out enough to people to ask them questions, to engage with them, because I was somewhat shy or because I was afraid of what their reaction would be. I think that's a big, big mistake, and I regret that. And I advise everyone, don't get yourself wrapped into a situation where you're afraid to make the first step to engage with people. I think it's very, very important. I would say that's the number one problem that I regret.
All right, and my last question for you, this comes from Todd. And Todd asks, with all your travels, what would be a great hidden spot that you can recommend to the rest of us to go to, and why?
I'm not telling anybody. No, I would, that's, people ask me, what's your favorite country, what favorite place? And I find it very difficult because I like every place I've been. But one of my favorite places is not necessarily a hidden spot, but is Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. I mean, it's a magical city, particularly during Carnival time. If you go to Carnival there, it's quite an amazing thing. So that's one spot. Another great spot, I would say, would be in Australia, the Gold Coast in Australia, which is incredible. Another spot would be, of course, in the US, Hawaii. Any of the islands in Hawaii are great. Bahamas is great. Cayman Islands is another place that's really great. But, it's really interesting. Cayman Islands is known for all of the secret banking that goes on and all of the interesting things that, in fact, there was a movie about this, the situation in Cayman Islands. I remember I was invited to give a speech, and I thought I'd tell a joke to all these Cayman Islanders, bankers and lawyers and so forth. And I got up and said, some people say the Cayman Islands is a sunny spot with shady people. That felt like a lead balloon. I shouldn't have said that. That's one of the things I regret, by the way.
All right, we are at time right now. I just want to say on behalf of everyone at Boston University, thank you, Mark Mobius, for lending us your time, sharing with us your expertise, allowing us to walk alongside you as you sort of remembered your time, at BU, across Boston, within fine arts, within theater, within communication. You are certainly a role model for all of us, and I think that what you've demonstrated in terms of your commitment to sort of ethical investment, your commitment to sound governance, your capacious knowledge, and your passion for actually like doing the work, being on the ground, engaging cultures, actually being in conversation with people, continuing a life of learning. It's that sort of life. It's that approach and that outlook, that actually inspires all of us to do more each day. So thank you very much, Mark Mobius. This is wonderful.
Thank you very much. It's really been a pleasure. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye now.